Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Dodgy Idealist. Tonight I have with me Civilisation trademark. Yes, that's it, trademark, TM. His ideas are fascinating, and he usually keeps me quite busy on Twitter with his philosophical viewpoints on individuality, rights, and group rights. And I'm hoping that he will illuminate us a bit more on his viewpoints on that. Welcome, Civ. Uh, Anything that I missed?
That's perfect for me.
Great. So tonight's topic is ethics, politics, and economics. And if I can quickly quote the thing that you tagged me on,
Mm.
um, you tagged me on something that Scott Miller on, oh, I should probably not say his name right now, it's too late now, but put out on social media. He said capitalism precludes socialism, but it can exist in a socialist arrangement.
Yeah, yeah, that was an interesting conversation, um, and it's something that I see very often. Is that people generally think that economic systems and politics exist sort of in this realm of their own, that they aren't based on anything, they aren't contingent on anything. You just sort of roll the dice, pick one, and away you go for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that the politics or that the government, the governmental structure, influences not only the economic system, but the ethics that lead to the economic system, if I'm getting that right.
Well, actually, I would say that if you view if you put politics and economics together almost as one thing,
Mhm.
they both depend on the ethical system
Yes.
of your society. So whatever your ethics are will determine what your laws are, what your rights are. And once you've established those will determine your political situation and your economic situation.
Hmm.
So these things exist as a result of ethics. So that conversation that we had basically came to a conclusion where he was telling me about Lenin's idea of the universality of capitalism, okay, and how capitalism basically went from country to country, um, cannibalizing any economic system that came before it. Okay, so in that idea is obviously the belief that an economic system is this entity in and of itself that will determine how the society is set up.
Hmm. Hmm.
So instead of saying that ethics will determine politics and economics, what the point of that conversation was that actually the economics will go backwards and you'll get your ethics from there.
Yeah, I think what people normally do is, and I had this conversation quite a few times. You know, whether I'm at the office or at a client or wherever. If I'm drawing something, right, we would
Mm,
call that reverse engineering. Right. So
exactly.
we know what the end result is, and we work our way back. But I think what people tend to forget is um, that it's a backwards movement. It's not a frontwards movement. So they know what the end result is that they want, and then they move backwards, thinking that the end result is the, how can I say, the cause, right? Is the beginning, is the starting point. Instead of
Yes.
flipping it back around then and say, right, so if I want that system, after I've extrapolated all of the steps necessary for that, I now have to move from this point towards that objective.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is exactly what I mean is that people will try and reverse engineer ethics
Yeah,
from systems.
yeah,
So instead of saying, I mean, the whole point of ethics is what is the right action for a human being to take, right?
yes.
Now, what they're saying is that what they do is they take the human being out of the equation. They hold their economic or political system as the referent, and then say, okay, how do human beings need to fit into this system? What do they need to do so that they can live under the system that I have decided is self-evident and everyone will follow?
Yeah. Well, one example that we probably can point to is China, right? So China basically got this to a degree right to instill a sort of fear for the government, in which they got that right with their surveillance systems and so on and so forth. So one could probably look at them and say, perhaps they achieved this, but was it the correct thing to do? That's the ultimate question, right? And I think that's where ethics really comes into. We said we're not going to handle these sort of things, but you know me. Okay, so ethics determine the system. That's basically what we got right now. But my question then is, what determines the ethics, right? So my ethics and your ethics are pretty much aligned, I can say, and I can see from our interactions and our agreements and disagreements here and there. It's very, very much aligned. But someone, for example, from a very collectivized sort of point of view will disagree with that, right? So some would say that the society determines the ethics, while you and I will say no, each individual will decide the ethics. Any input on that?
Well, I mean, that's precisely it. Is where's the starting point? And that's why you can ignore the political spectrum entirely, because the political spectrum is not a place for individual rights. It's a place for societal rights. The only thing that differs in the political spectrum is the flavor of those rights. Okay. And the characteristics. But at its base, at its heart, is the will to subordinate the individual to society. And in our view, we flip that around and we say, no. Society is a consequence of the individual, not that the individual is a consequence of society.
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people understand that point.
No, well, I mean, I'm not sure why, because if you look at the collectivist position, there's no room to talk about human ethics. I mean, ethics, human beings are merely a means to the end of society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no question of what action human beings should take. There's only a question of what society demands of human beings on a day-to-day basis. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the people that actually make up the society.
And this brings me to another point. So yesterday I posted something. I said that the greater good is not predicated on what is good for everyone, but rather what is good for those that are in power, right? Because this is what I'm getting at with this whole collectivist sort of movement. And as you say, society dictates to the individual what is good for society. But what we've seen throughout history, whether we're talking about the USSR, about the CCP in China, about Venezuela, doesn't matter wherever collectivist movements have sprung up, it's usually not for the good of that entire society, but rather for the good of those in power. And those people in power have normally abused that system to their own means and their own ends.
No, I absolutely agree with that.
This is probably why, socialists are trying very, very hard to move away from a governing system. So one of the conversations I had in the past was that the socialists said that a socialist society has no hierarchical structure, right? But they point to, what was that place's name? It was in Spain, Catalonia. Yes, they point to Catalonia in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, thereabout. right?
1936, I think.
Yes, when it was very anarchistic and very socialist, you could say, before the fascists actually took it back into Spain, right? Or took it into
Yeah,
Spain.
it didn't last very long.
Yes. But if you look at what they claim, right, it had no governing structure. But if you look at what was happening in there, they did have a governing structure of some sort, right? And there
Mhm.
was a military as well. And the military has a governing structure of some sort as well, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's my question. If that is if that is true, is socialism, is this collectivist idea, right, in and of itself, can it be upheld? Is it feasible? Because to me it's not. Because I understand that, I determine what is right for myself and you determine what is right for yourself, as long as we do not um, overstep the boundaries where I put your rights in danger or take away from your rights and vice versa. For the collectivist, that doesn't matter. If it's for the greater good, it's for the greater good.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why I say that collectivists, or the agents of society, um, because they hold basically only one moral tenet, the good of society.
Mm.
That doesn't tell you anything about the nature of what your society will be like.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the power lens is actually a good way to view this, because the first point, when it comes to socialism, or that sort of anarchistic socialism that you're talking about,
Mm.
if you look at Catalonia, what happened? Basically, they went on for, it wasn't a long time. I don't even think it survived a year. Okay.
Mm.
And then a stronger force came in and just completely wiped that little idea right off the map,
Yeah.
just like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at individual rights and group rights, individual rights diffuse power.
Yeah.
This is the important thing to note, is that what individual rights do is that it doesn't give a power greater to one than to another. Okay,
Yes.
so the concentration of power is not possible.
Yeah.
Okay, unless of course you hold contradictions, which a lot of people do. But the whole thing is, take our country. So take all the power that we think human beings have, and you divide it by 60 million.
Mm.
Okay, but in any socialist system, what you will always have is a concentration of power.
Yes.
So in the case of Catalonia, what you have is a stronger force coming in and just seizing power.
Yeah.
Okay, because there's nothing to actually um, express or protect the ethics of that society.
Mm.
It's whoever has the strongest force is right,
Yeah.
and that is exactly how the concentration of power in socialism happens.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's the two variants of that. You've got a direct democracy. So in that case, concentration of power will go to 51% of society.
Yes.
So on all things, 51% of society will have the governing power over the other 49%. Okay.
Yes.
And then if you take the context of South Africa, we have, a representational democracy. Okay. Where you vote for, I think the correct term would probably be oligarchy.
Yes.
If you wanted to know what society is or where you can find it, then look no further than Parliament,
Mm.
because that's society. They determine right and wrong, all of that.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, as I've said many, many, many times before, there's nothing moral about 51%.
Mm. And
Okay,
sorry.
there's
Yes.
nothing you can learn about ethics when it comes to a 51% vote.
Yeah.
They can decide that theft is illegal today, legal tomorrow,
Yeah.
because there is no underlying ethical structure to the thing.
And
Ethics are determined by the 51%.
yeah. And this brings me up to, like, for example, a lot of the other contentious issues as well, right? whether that's abortion, whether that's expropriation without compensation, and so on and so forth. My personal view is I don't want government to decide my morals or my ethical behavior, right? It should only be there to protect my rights.
Yeah, and you see, the thing is, in in an individual rights context, what will limit what you can actually put in a Bill of Rights is the level of human fallibility. Because the thing is, we are all right and we are all wrong, just depends on the day.
Yes.
Okay. So the problem is what you see happening with democracies is that they take it from the context that really there is no right and wrong. The 51% is correct, and you just have to sort of subordinate yourself to that. There's really nowhere else to go from there.
Yeah. It's
So
this sort of democracy that we're talking about, and this is probably why it's so difficult to implement a correct democracy, is because of that, right? Because of that, it's mob rule, we can say. Whether it's direct representation or direct democracy and indirect or representative democracy, there is a sort of mob rule. And the DA, for example, being the opposition party in South Africa, doesn't really capture all of my ideals, right? Or all of my underlying convictions, let's say it that like that. Um, and as such, when they do bring bills and stuff forward, I might not always agree with them. And that's the thing. That's what people need to start to realize. Government is not there to determine your moral or ethical behavior. That's on you. That's the individual, right? There might be some rights that need to be protected. Right, let's start with that, with the might. But obviously, you and I know there is a preclude to that, if that's correct. So let's take,
yeah,
for example, the right of life. Not the right to life, but the right of life. Or is it the other way around? I get confused. But if you choose to actually live within the society, then you cannot endanger anyone else's life that also choose to live in that society, right?
yeah,
So that right, I would say, needs to be protected by government, right? And any laws made in that government needs to take this into consideration without trying to push the mob rule. But that's very hard to do because people tend to want to have mob rule.
no, absolutely. I mean, even Madison, and I think this was before he wrote the amendments in the American Constitution. He put out a series of letters and articles, and one of the most famous of them is where he actually discusses this problem of the individual versus the mob. He says that the danger is always going to be that um, whether whether the hierarchy is whether the hierarchy is corrupt or it's completely legitimate, you're still going to have the haves and the have-nots, and the
Yeah.
have-nots are going to look at the haves, and eventually they're going to organize themselves into a mob,
Hmm.
and they'll just start burning shit down.
Yeah. And this is something that's I don't think, well, I'm going to say it as I see it. This is something that I see within collectivist movements as well, whether it's socialist or whether it's communist or whether it's fascist or nationalist in the extremes, obviously. Um, it's that tendency to look at the others in an envious manner and trying to organize the group to start to take away what they preclude as privileges or advantages that they may not have from those that they perceive to have these advantages or privileges. We can see this in for example, Nazi Germany, right? Hitler, for
Yeah,
example, saw this as a shrinking market problem, where he saw the East trading their foodstuff for industrialized items like spanners and screwdrivers and, all these other mechanical stuff as well. His greatest fear, and this is probably why he started World War II in to begin with, his greatest fear was that eventually the East will get industrialized and no longer trade food with the German people, right?
Okay.
So that's why he started the war, because he was like, no, we're not going to be, starving to death, because otherwise the poor people, and this is his thoughts, otherwise the poor people that do not have the funds to buy the food will start to organize themselves and become Marxist in origin and overthrow the government. And because of his views of Marxism and capitalism, both being a Jewish construct and his hatred for the Jews, he then decided the only option is to wage war against the East and take what is rightfully theirs. So there was
Yeah,
method to
it's
the madness of Hitler. I'll just say that. I'm not praising the man, but I'm saying he's not crazy. He had methods to his madness. Anyone that says Hitler was a crazy madman, no. No, no, no. He was very, very, very meticulous in what he did and why he did it. Obviously, you and I both know that the shrinking market problem is a lie. And the capitalists, not the capitalists, but the more communist inclined people that want to have this mob rule and want to push more collectivist ideals and ideas on us do have this fear underlying it. They're the ones that say that, for example, you can only trade so much, and then when that other country has developed, at some point they'll no longer trade with you, because why?
yeah. I mean, there's so much to untangle here because, I mean, it's to a degree I can agree that there is a level of jealousy that underpins this whole thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I recognize that a lot of people that would probably identify with the left are just really kind, if I can
No,
put it that
that's
way.
that's true. They're very, very, how can I say, empathetic towards the other side as well. And this is also why I keep telling people that an individual is more complex than their ideological leaning or their political leaning, right? And also why I try to emphasize on the underlying convictions of people. There's a reason why you feel the need to help others, right? Or there's a reason why you feel that stealing is wrong, or whatever the case may be. You have underlying convictions for every action that you do, and we have to take that into consideration. This is also why I believe, identifying with one or other political spectrum, if I can call it that, or spec on the spectrum, is pretty useless, because
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
I might agree with more free mercantile sort of a more free mercantile system, but I might also agree with a more socialist sort of welfare system in some cases, you know?
yeah, but you see, the thing is, the reason why the spectrum is the spectrum, and it's not three monolithic, well-defined concepts,
Mm,
is because there's no basis guiding any of these people's decisions.
yes.
Okay, it's a free for all on the spectrum.
Yeah.
That's why there's so many variances. I mean, if you ask me to name all the attributes that would make up a person on the right, I don't know. I have no idea. I
Mm,
mean, I've got religious, conservative, that's about it. I mean, the differences between just people on one side of that spectrum, they they're incredible. There's so many.
mm. For
I mean,
example,
it's an aggregation, and I don't think it's a useful aggregation.
no. No, I tend to agree with that. I mean, if I look at myself, for example, I might be very religious as well, but I might hold views that are contrary to other people that are religious as well, you know. So, um, how can I say my stance on, for example, gay marriage? I'm like, while I might not agree personally with that, what you do is your choice. As long as it does not negatively impact me and my family, I couldn't care less what you do. But the
Yeah,
moment
but I mean,
that impacts me, that's when I have an issue. Like me personally and directly.
no, absolutely. I mean, that is, rights exist in the context of society.
Yeah.
So, it's how we interact with one another, and it limits our action in that context. But you see, the thing is, the whole trick of society is to have a system in which, if you had the maximum amount of disagreement between you and everyone else living in that society, that you could still have the rule of law underpinning it.
Yes.
So basically, in my view, if you look at Thomas Jefferson's statute on religious freedoms, okay, which is in part inspiration for the First Amendment, separating church and state.
Yes.
What he actually did there, and I just wish that he took it to its natural conclusion, is that what he's saying is that you might believe this, I might believe that, okay?
Mm.
But what we need to do is make sure that what you believe or what I believe has no effect in law.
Yes. I think that's very
Okay?
important.
No, absolutely. So the full conclusion of Jefferson's statute should have been the separation of state and opinion.
Mm. Mm.
So that's why I say what would limit a Bill of Rights would be things that we can be wrong about.
Yeah.
But when it comes to human beings, because we all are human beings, there are universal common features and attributes between us.
Mm.
And that is where, in my opinion, we should be looking. Now, if you look at the South African Constitution, if you start off straight with the preamble, you can see that this is not a document that is based on human beings. It's a document that is based on what the framers of the Constitution thought human beings should be.
Yes. And it's strange
Now
that
that,
you say that, because that is an observation that Dee and myself had made as well last night. She basically more or less said the very same thing, that it's a compromise between people instead of actually defining what is rights, what the rights are.
yeah, absolutely. It's we always just keep, for me, I always just keep coming back to what is the referent.
Mm.
I mean, if you ask the question, what is right? What is correct for human beings to do? Obviously, human beings are the thing it should be based on. But
Yeah.
you've got all these secondary, periphery moral questions, and you want to base the primary superseding law of a country on these periphery issues. Let's take compassion, so that, or empathy, as you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we've got is we've got a thing where a group of people say we should help people that are less fortunate than us. Okay. But that's not really the question that one has to ask. The primary question is, first, if I don't help somebody, can I still live in the society?
Yes. I see, and that's the sort of questions. This is why I like talking to you, because you ask these weird questions, and then I have to go and think about this, and I lay awake at night. Thank you very much for sleepless nights, Steph. But but it's very important. These are the sort of important questions. So for me personally, not being charitable does not mean that you cannot be part of the society. It just means that you are not as charitable as your neighbor might be, right? That's your decision to make. So this is probably where myself and collectivists struggle, because while I understand that I must help other people, I also understand that it's a personal choice, because it's an underlying individual moral decision to make. It's not mine to dictate to them. It's not the state's place to dictate that to them as well. It's their own position on that which will dictate whether or not they will be charitable or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I think the primary problem with that question is that it's presented as an axiom.
Yeah.
So it's presented as a self-evident truth that, I mean, even Noam Chomsky, right?
Mm.
I mean, I've been reading Chomsky's books for years, and I've been trying to find one justification for why he says we should help other people. And he never gives one. He literally never gives one. He just says, and I'm quoting directly here, it's elementary. We just should.
No.
But the obvious question is, but why?
Yeah. Every person wants to know that. And if you're going to tell me that something is elementary or axiomatic, as you would put it, or as I would put it, transcendental, because it's outside of the material world, I would need to know why still, right? I can't say being charitable is good, but why is it good? Well, because in my view, if I were to give an answer, it would be because it alleviates the suffrage of others around me, right? And that in and of itself, that position is for me transcendental or axiomatic. Is as that reason. Not I should help others, but I should help others because, and insert reason.
Yeah, but no, but you see, but for me, it's not axiomatic, because if you are using the referent of human life, if you are asking the question, what is a human being, and what is the correct action for a human being, you've got this problem here. And I mean, you can take it from Camus, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the first lines in one of his books, I think it's The Myth of Sisyphus, I'm not sure, but he basically says that the fundamental philosophical question is, should you kill yourself? Now, what he's saying there, or what I take him to say there, is that we are the only creature on this planet for whom life and death is an active choice.
Mm.
Okay, it's life and death is not axiomatic for human beings the way it is for a dog or a cat or a rat.
Mm.
Okay, we can choose to kill ourselves. So for us, the primary question is, should we live or should we die? Now, the problem is, if you decide in your individual capacity that you want to live, then you impose obligations on yourself immediately.
Mm.
Now, by what argument are those obligations imposed on somebody else? It's your choice. You make the choice to live.
Mm. But
so that's what I'm saying. The question of whether we should alleviate suffering, and I mean, personally, I don't see that as a bad goal to have, but that's not the question. That's not a question of should we, and I don't want to say we actually, should I help other people? Well, that's for me to decide.
Yes.
The question is, can I live in concert with other people if I decide, no, I don't want to? Because what you have then is a situation where what we are actually doing is bribing society for the right to live in it.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. That's a very interesting point of view.
And I mean, once you get to that point where you basically have to pay people to live in society, then you get into all these contradictions with law. Because what you are saying, you've got this, what can I say? It's a split standard, right? So for some people, you are saying that, okay, the correct action for you to take is to take on the obligations and responsibility of your existence, and in the same breath, take on the people for whom either they cannot or will not look after themselves. Okay?
Yes.
So I mean, the thing is, let's take the ammunition that's always thrown when the subject comes up. When you say something like tax is theft, which it is.
Yes, I agree with that 100%, because I still need to be able to choose where my taxes go.
Well, I
or
mean,
whether
absolutely.
Or not I want to pay.
Well, exactly. For me, it's a question of, do I want to pay? And it comes back down to that choice, that individual choice. If you want to be charitable, nothing stops you. But the question is, if you don't want to be charitable, someone will stop you. They definitely will.
It brings me back to, for example, I understand completely, and oh, maybe I should say it outright somewhere now. I agree with you on that stance, right? Um, because this brings me back to a meme sort of that I saw very very early on, um, where Jesus is talking to the people on the Olive of the Mount, right?
Mm.
And he says, "Take care of your brethren and so on and so forth. Be charitable to them." And one or two people ask him, "But can't we create a government and let them tax us and let the government take care of these people?" And then Jesus says, "Okay, I'm going to start again, slowly, so that I don't lose you again." Right? It brings me back to that. So for me, it's like, my problem with taxes is, as soon as it's being used for like charity, welfare, it no longer puts that obligation upon me, but upon society as a whole. So no longer do I have the choice in the matter, because if it's being obligated by the society of a whole as a whole, it's being dictated down to the atom, basically, to each and every individual within that society to contribute. Having government um, that looks after the poor doesn't make you a moral person, doesn't make you a good person, if that makes sense. It's the individual actions, the individual choices that you make that define you as a good or a bad person.
Yeah, I agree in that context. But
Hmm.
you see, it's there's an argument among socialists that charity is actually a selfish act, and I tend to agree,
Okay.
because every time that I've done or do charity, it's for my own personal reasons.
Yes.
And the problem with the system of this sort of middleman black hole is that it completely alienates you from the people that you would give charity to.
Yeah.
I mean, we are strangers to one another.
Hmm.
You know, the saucer card gets a balance at the end of the month, and you know, everybody's thanking the government.
Yeah.
The government is not. And I mean, that's why we're sitting in this situation where those who produce the value are completely villainized by those who do not.
Hmm.
And the question is, what kind of system are we tacitly endorsing here?
Yeah.
We are saying that you should, on one hand, be as successful at survival as you possibly can, and that you will be hated for it.
Hmm.
So where's the value?
See this.
Which one do you choose?
Yeah. See, this also brings me up. I think it was St. John Chrysostom that said this. Charity relies on two things, right? It relies on, first and foremost, the willingness aspect. Okay?
Yeah.
On both parties' side. It doesn't help that I want to give you something and you don't want it, because then it's no longer charity. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then he says the other thing that it depends on is gratitude. The moment
Yes.
that there is no that there is no willingness or no gratitude, that's the moment that the whole system falls apart. Then you can no longer call it charity.
No, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I mean, um, gratitude is the currency that you exchange for the lack of real currency to exchange,
Yes.
right? So you, as a recipient of charity, that is what you can give, and it is what you should give. I
Yes.
mean, the word ungrateful exists for a reason.
Yes. You see, because now,
And the other,
sorry, because once you don't have gratitude anymore, or once you don't have willingness anymore, it becomes obligatory. And one or the other, the one side will start to resent the other side, and the receiving side will most likely, how can I say it, um, not become dependent, but become insistent on the giving act.
well, of course it would. It's like I said, what kind of message implicitly are you sending to people?
Yes.
So I mean, you're creating a class of slaves and masters, and because the slaves live in a better house than the masters, you get confused about where the structure is running.
You see, and this again, this is my initial problem with government. It's people seem to think that government is a mechanism to force morals or ethics or ethical choices or moral choices upon the society as a whole, instead of just protecting the most basic or the most important human rights that we can choose based on the choice that we make, whether or not we want to, first of all and foremost, as I think you put it, want to live first. That's the first thing, and then what it means to live within that society. Have I
Well,
got?
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, no, yeah, it would be, first of all, the choice to live.
Yeah.
Then you have to ask yourself the question, what is the best way to live?
Mm.
Okay. So we're still here in the individual phase.
Mm.
Now, what you're doing is when more than one person comes together with another, you're going to have tacit or explicit conventions of behavior.
Mm.
Okay. And a Bill of Rights is just that convention made explicit. But the thing is, the Bill of Rights needs to support the choices that you have made to live.
Mm.
And they need to support your ability to make good on that choice.
Yes. See, this is now where the whole ethics leads to politics and economics comes into. Because once you determine all those questions, all right, or the answers to those questions, and you create your Bill of Rights, I would think that your Bill of Rights would also sort of dictate what you can do within a country or within a society, both politically wise as well as economically wise.
Yes, it would, because the thing is, so for instance, if your Bill of Rights gets expressed and it's a case of the action that individuals can take in the context of society, and that no individual has power over the other, right? On these periphery moral questions, these secondary moral questions, then the system, the economic system, for instance, will be capitalism.
Hmm. A more free market based
You,
system. But again, some would argue in that instance, right? It might not even be a free market because the free market is expressed in its entirety within the black market. So it would be free market based with some restrictions based on the ethics that we choose.
well, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to see the examples. I mean, what exactly would be limited
Well, for example,
by ethics?
if we say that no person is a master over another, for example, slavery is definitely out of the question. But on the black market, you know, no ethics apply.
Yeah, I think what's confusing me with the term black market is that the only free market we've had for the last 5 months is the black
Yes,
market.
that is very true. But again, so even in that context, like a society would need some sort of ethical regulation applied to it, right? That's basically what we're trying to say. And I think that people don't understand this because of, how can I say, not understanding personal choice. That's first and foremost, and not really asking these critical questions. Because the way I see it, the ethics that I choose, right? Whether or not I'm working in the black market, let's say no regulation is imposed on the market whatsoever. And there's like things that I can buy on the black market that would be very questionable, whether it's slaves or drugs or guns or whatever the case may be. My ethics would determine where I would spend my money and how I would spend my money. So I personally would not buy a slave or drugs or anything that would constitute to harm of another person, right? But another person, you know, with no ethics would go, well, what's wrong with slavery? What's wrong with guns? Illegal guns. What's wrong with drugs and other things that can harm another person? So there, for me, and this touches on it. Ethics leads to your political system. Ethics lead to your economic system. That also includes the restrictions that you're going to place on society in practicing within these systems. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I'm just chewing on that one.
Okay. uh, See, you've got me into this thing now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. It's completely contingent. It's not something that you pluck out of the air.
Yeah.
But I mean, when it comes to definitions of free market, you know, I the idea that the free market has certain permissions is the thing that I struggle with.
See, and that's why I say that, explicitly the free market is expressed within the black market where there is no restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, that this whole NCC thing has just thrown me when it comes to that term black market. But I mean, at base, the black market is something that acts under the radar of law.
Yes,
So it's not at all beholden unto the law.
yes. And as a result of that, people tend to act unethically, if I can say it like that. That, I think, is when true human nature makes itself, you know, presentable. Not presentable, but presents itself in its fullest form. Because some people, like I would hope you and I would hope myself, would choose not to buy things or purchase things or conduct in trade that would harm other individuals, while others might see it as, well, there's no law really, and nothing compels me ethically to do this, so, or to not do this, so I'm going to do or not do this action, whether or not it harms another person.
Yeah, I think that's a very good distinction to make. It's
Mm.
between the free market and the black market.
Yeah. So I think, for me, it's like, yes, the market will be freer, depending on the sort of ethics that the society eventually um, comes down to with these primary choices that they make on the individual level. But I would still think that there would still be some restrictions because, unfortunately, society is expressed within the political system.
Yeah, but again, like I said, you're making the distinction between the black market and the free market.
Mm.
Now, one of the properties of a free market is that it's not controlled centrally.
Yes.
So, I mean, what is bought and sold might be contingent on what the underlying rights are.
Mm.
Um, so, I mean, that's the thing. I'm trying to think of concrete examples that we can can throw up here so that we can, crash the free market.
Oops. Well, let's take for example, the recent cigarette trade.
Yeah.
That's actually, or the alcohol trade. Either would work. Um, in a free market where there is no central control over this, right? Prices would have been normal as is, right? We have to be very, very specific here as well. Restrictions are not necessarily control either, right?
Well, I think it's a question of, are the restrictions natural or are they synthesized?
Yes.
And
So,
where do those restrictions come from?
yes. So, for me, for example, if I understand this now correctly, natural restrictions would depend on the individual ethic or the individual's ethics, whereas synthesized control or synthesized regulation or restriction would be imposed on government to restrict freedoms of the individual.
Well, if we take the NCC, for me, that's an example of a synthesized restriction.
Yes.
So what was legal yesterday is now legal today.
Yeah.
What I mean by natural is that it's a natural consequence of the founding document of the country, right? So when 60 million of us get together and say, these are the basic set of rules that we're going to live by, right? After that, it's I don't want to say free for all, but that's basically what it is.
I think we're going to definitely need a part 2 of this because it's a very, very deep topic. And I think people will be very much interested in it. And we have reached our hour mark. And I think it's a very, very good topic to have. I think we should talk definitely more on this. Definitely. Because I'm still trying to figure out where this all fits in. I'm sure many other people as well. But what I can say is I like the way that you think, and I like the way that you move towards or move on these topics, even though I get them wrong 90% of the time. Uh, I learn from you. That's what I'll say. I definitely learn from you, and you do keep me awake at night when I think of these things. Um, are there any other remarks that you want to make before we end the show?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a good chat. I think what's always valuable about these things, and especially challenging things that you hold to be true, is that, like I said, we're all fallible, and you're always constantly trying to figure these things out. So yeah, I agree with you. We definitely need a part 2. We weren't supposed to get so deep into economics, but we ended it on a free market bang. Or is it a free market? Who knows?
I think that's what we'll discover in part 2. So let's let's keep that for the interesting part 2, right? Because I think already we've given a lot of food for thought for the viewers and listeners to chew on. It's very interesting, very, very interesting. I really do recommend thinking about these things. But on that bombshell, guys, thank you very much. This is the Dodge ID list. I will link Civ's Twitter handle in the description. Please do follow him. He's very quirky, very, very fun to talk to, and he's got a wild imagination when it comes to these things. And I really, really do enjoy engaging with these sort of people. And I hope you do too. Thank you very much. Good night.